Okay, so we had in last week's Parsha, Truma, talked about the building of the Mishkan and some of the things that are in the Mishkan. We heard about talked about the building of the Shulchan, the table for the showbread, the menorah, and at the end of this week's Parsha we have the Mizbeach HaZahav. So the Mizbeach HaZahav was the third of the three, they're called kalim. Utensils, definitely not the right word here, but the three tools, maybe? That's definitely better. I don't love vessels. Vessels is the right word. It's the right translation of kalim, and that's the way people translate it. But anyways, vessels will do. Tools. Three. Is this dry erase? Yes. Okay. So in the Mishkan, anyways, there was the Kodesh, the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Beis HaMikdash was the same. We had the Kodesh, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the Beis HaMikdash. This was the Heichal. And there was the big Mizbeach out here that was used for the offerings, sacrifices, the animals. And then in here, we had the three things that were used, the Shulchan, which was this golden table that was used for the showbread, for the Lechem Aponim. The menorah, the candelabrum, oil was put in there and burnt every day. And the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden Mizbeach. It was a smaller Mizbeach. And this Mizbeach was used exclusively for the burning of Ketores. Now, there is a separation between the discussion about the Shulchan and the menorah, which we're told about last week, and then this week at the end of the Parsha, we're told about the Mizbeach HaZahav, this golden menorah. Obviously, there's a reason. If you would think that it would make sense to discuss them continuously as a continuum, these three things, in proximity to each other, if they're separated out and the Mizbeach HaZahav is saved for the very end of this whole sort of discussion about the Mishkan and its appliances, non-electrical appliances, these utensils, vessels, whatever we're going to call them, and all the things in the Mishkan. And the Shulchan the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden Mizbeach, is discussed separately to the other ones that were next to it, and it's saved for the very end. There's got to be a reason. Now, the reason is particularly, I would say, both interesting. Well, not both, because I'm going to say three things, I think. Interesting, relevant, and important for us to understand because of what the Mishkan represents. Right? At the very beginning of last week's Parsha, the Pasuk says, Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'soichem, and you will make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them. Right? So, Va'asu li mikdash. V'shachanti b'soichem. This is Hashem telling Moshe Rabbeinu. This was literally the instruction for the Jewish people to make the Mishkan. So it says mikdash. And this commandment also later on was fulfilled in the construction of the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, the actual temple in Jerusalem. And the Mishkan was more or less continuous with the Batei Mikdash. It was the traveling version. So this was the immediate commandment and we have it, that's why it's in the Parsha together. Hashem tells Moshe, V'asu li mikdash, they shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell, V'shachanti b'soichem, I will dwell in them. And then we talk about the building of the Mishkan and the things that are in it. Now, if you look over here, it says, V'asu li mikdash, they will build for me a temple, a sanctuary. Let's call it temple. V'shachanti b'soichem, and I will dwell in them. If you would ever write that sentence in an English language class, you would lose substantial marks because you can't make something and live in them. If you made a temple, you would think that it would make sense for Hashem to say, Va'asuli mikdash, and they will make for me a temple, V'shachanti b'seicha, and I will dwell in it. B'seicha, I'm not sure. Either way, in it. It says, they will make for me a temple and I will dwell in them. And so, it's pointed out in a number of places that the message here is, now obviously, what order do we do this? I'm going to say the message that we take and then I'll come back to the fine print afterwards. And so the message that we're getting here, it's said by the Shalom and others, that va'asu, they will each make for me a temple. Every single one of them will make themselves in their own body, in their own home, in their own family, in their own environment, in their own life. They will each make for me a temple. And as soon as we put the word each in there, now we have plural. They will each make for me a temple and I will dwell in them, in all of these temples that each one will make. Because every one of us is here and Hashem is commanding, instructing, and letting every one of us know that every one of us has the opportunity and the privilege and the responsibility and the obligation, yes, all of the above, and they always go together, to construct our own individual temple out of our body, out of our home, out of our work, out of our environment, out of our community, out of our life, out of everything. And that's why it says, and I will dwell in them, in each of the temples that they will each construct for me. So the Pasuk's telling us not only about the construction of the literal physical structure, the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan in the desert, the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, it's telling us also that we each have to construct our own individual sanctuary, temple. You know, they say your body is your temple. It should be. Now, most of the time that expression is said or written by people, the context's a little bit different, but the truth is, they go hand in hand. Right, Hashem, the Mishkan was supposed to be built to be as beautiful as it could be. The Beis Hamikdash was supposed to be built to be as physically or as structurally beautiful and solid as it could be. And if we are making our bodies into a temple, part of that is that our bodies should be as healthy and strong as they can be. But that's not the entirety of what we mean by temple. That's because it's a temple. Right? So every one of us is supposed to make our body, our home, our family, our environment, our work, our everything, our surroundings into a temple for Hashem. And if this is the case, and the temple that we're supposed to make ourselves and our homes and our lives into is analogous to the literal Mishkan, the literal Beis Hamikdash, it's our personal equivalent of that. If it's equivalent, then looking to the Mishkan, looking to the Beis Hamikdash is going to give us insight into how a temple, how a sanctuary is built, how it's set up, how it's organized. What do you do there? What do you use it for? So looking at the structure and the functioning of the Mishkan is going to tell us a lot about the structure and functioning of a temple. And then considering that every one of us has the opportunity and obligation and responsibility to make ourselves and our lives into a temple, we can look to the Mishkan and get insight into how to do that, which means that if there's something about the way the Torah tells us about the construction or functioning of the Mishkan that seems unexpected, and obviously it's there for a reason, it makes sense that we should say, I wonder why the Torah would be choosing to do it that way. What's it trying to tell us? And that's important because this is the prototype for what every single one of us is here to make out of our own body and our own home and family and life. So it does matter. It's not just some interesting thing. So we'll have something nice to say at the Shabbos table. The parsha, you would think that this would have been in last week's parsha together with the Shulchan and the Menorah, and it wasn't. It's the end of this week's parsha. Why? Because, such a beautiful idea. Wow. And, we can all clap our hands and say we heard a nice Dvar Torah at the Shabbos table. It's a lot more than that. I don't mean to put that down, obviously. It's a beautiful thing. But it's a lot more than that. The reason that it's important to answer this question is not just because it's academic, not just because it's part of the truth of Torah. And even if that's all it was, that would have been enough. That would have been invaluable already. But it's important because we have a question about something that was clearly intentional, that was unexpected, in the way the Torah tells us about the prototype of what every one of us is here to do in our own lives. It's probably worth investigating and trying to understand that. Right now, Hakol Helach Hachar Hachitum in Hebrew means, so the fine print that I was just going to say is, the way I translated this and talked about this pasuk almost made it sound as though this pasuk is talking only about the individual temple that each of us has to make, because clearly if you look at the way the wording of the pasuk is written in the Chumash, it can't be that it's talking about the literal Mishkan, because it says a temple and it says in them, so it's not talking about that. It is talking about, obviously that's the pshat, that's the simple literal meaning. And the reason that it makes sense to word it like that is because it says, Va'osu li mikdash, they will build for me a temple, v'shachanti, and I will dwell b'soicham, among them in the temple. So b'soicham can mean in them or among them. So among them would be the correct way to translate it, reading the pasuk at the literal face value, the pshat level, but it's also telling us, v'shachanti b'soicham, they will each make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in those, in each of those temples that they will construct individually. So both are true. Now, in Hebrew, there's an expression, hakol holach achar chitum. We may have mentioned this somewhat recently, I'm not sure. But chitum means conclusion. Literally, it means the signing off, right? Chasima chatima means signing. Chitum means the signing off or the conclusion, the way you sign something off. And what this means halachically, this is a halachic term, which means that when you say, let's say the bracha of me'ein shalosh, the bracha that we say after you eat mezonos or after you drink wine, you say ala micha, and it begins with ala micha and it ends with ala micha, or begins with ala gefen and ends with ala gefen, or ala peres and ala peres. So the question is, if you eat cake and you say ala gefen, you didn't bench on the cake, so you have to bench again and say ala micha, which you were supposed to. What about if you start with one and you end with the other one? If you start with the right one, you end with the wrong one, you start with the wrong one, you end with the right one, does it count? And so, it depends. So this is where this expression comes from. It says, Hakol holach achar chitum, it goes by the conclusion. So if you ate cake, if you ate something mazonis and you're supposed to say ala micha, and you start al ha'etz or ala gefen and you end ala micha, that's fine. Because Hakol holach achar chitum, we go by the conclusion, by the way you sign off. If you do the reverse, you start correctly and end incorrectly, then it doesn't work, right? And
what if you had wine and cake? Then you gotta say both.
You have to say both.
You can't.
And if you only said one, you have to go back and say it again for the other one.
You can't just add. No, you add it
If you remember halfway, no, when I say both, that's what it means. You do add them together. You just combine the beginning and the end, and you say it once. If you forget, and what I meant to say about saying it again is just to illustrate the necessity of doing them both. If you say one and you forget to combine the other one in, you actually have to say the whole bracha again a second time for the other one. Now, it's just a very pragmatic, common sense thing, right? When you read, if you're writing something, if you're writing a song, if you're writing a poem, if you're writing a blog post, an essay, whatever it is, I mean, if it's something online, if it's a blog post, the most important thing is the title, and sometimes the only thing that matters is the title and the subtitle, because people will read the title and then keep scrolling. And you could literally sometimes do that and just write blah, 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 literally blah, 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 and most people won't even know. Certainly, if you write a really good opening paragraph, a really good concluding paragraph, and you just go blah, 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 blah in between for 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 paragraphs, 99% of people probably are not going to notice because, 85 or 90 or 92% of people just read the title and keep going. Out of the 2 or 5 or 10% of people that actually click on the title and read it, they're going to read the intro, read the conclusion, and keep going. The reason the introductory paragraph is really important is because if you don't have a really good introductory paragraph, you're going to lose people. If your opening paragraph is just lame and uninteresting, people are going to start reading and it's going to be like, next. Right? But the reason that the opening paragraph is really important is only as a means to an end, primarily, to keep people reading, to engage people so that they'll read what you wrote. The one part of your written material that is going to have a disproportionately important impact on the impact of your piece of writing is the conclusion. If you are performing a poem, or you wrote a song, or you wrote an article, a blog post, an essay, something, and the concluding paragraph, and particularly the concluding sentence, is like fire, it's strong, it's tight, it's powerful, people are going to walk away impacted by that, because that's the last thing they saw. That's the chiton, that's the conclusion. Right? And the most important, everything up until that point is important for a number of reasons, because sometimes it takes a lot of different things to come together to give the full picture. And the opening is very important because you need to keep people reading. But the thing that, if you're going to put all your energy into making one line the absolute best, you want it to be the concluding line, the last line, because that's where it all comes to a head, and that's the thing that has the most impact. You probably want your second best line to be the first line, but it's the conclusion that's where it all comes to a head. And the same thing is true here. When the Torah is telling us about the Mishkan, the construction of the Mishkan, the things that are in the Mishkan, etc., at the very, very end, what does it leave for last? The Mizbeach Hazav, the golden menorah. Which means in our temple, the temple of our lives, the temple of our homes, the temple of our bodies, the temples that every one of us is working to construct and to use in our own lives, throughout our lives, there's something about the message of the golden Mizbeach. Did I say menorah before? I meant Mizbeach. There's something about the golden Mizbeach, the Mizbeach HaZahav, and what it represents and the message that it carries that makes it the thing that you want to be concluding with. That's like, boom, that's that maximum impact statement, the thing that matters the most. So what is the point of the Mishkan? The point of the Mishkan is v'shachanti b'seicham, that Hashem should dwell in it. What's the point of us making our own bodies and homes and lives into a temple, a sanctuary for Hashem, so that Hashem should dwell and be present and integrated, and our homes should have divinity of Hashem integrated into them, and our bodies and our lives should be permeated with the infinity of the Creator. That's the point. And somehow there's something about the golden Mizbeach that is the epitome of that. What was the golden Mizbeach used for? I think I've mentioned it earlier. It was used for ketores, right? The offering up of incense. Now, if you look at the word ketores, which means incense, in Hebrew, especially going between Hebrew and Aramaic, there are letters that could be interchanged. If we change the word tes, which, especially between Aramaic and Hebrew, tes is interchangeable with shin, kesher means a knot. A knot is when you take two things and you bind them together, and in the knot is a singular noun. When you look at a knot, you don't say, oh, there are two strings that are caught up and tied together and we can't separate them. You say there is a knot. A knot is a single entity. It's a composite entity. but it's a single composite entity made up of two things that have come together. And Ketores represents Kesher, this knot, this unity, this coming together between us and Hashem. Us becoming one with Hashem, and to the point that the service, when the incense was offered on the Mizbeach Hazav, no one else was allowed to be in the room in the Kodesh except for the Kohen who was offering up the incense. For any of the other services, other people could be present. When the Ketores was being offered, was being burnt on the Mizbeach, only the Kohen who was burning the incense was allowed to be present. No one else would be allowed to be present. To the point that the Midrashim talk about when the Pasuk says, and no one else will be present when the incense is offered, they say, who's no one else? Even the angels. Even angels depart from that space. Why? Because the offering of the incense it represents a profound oneness and an intimacy between, in the Mishkan, it's the Jewish people collectively and Hashem. And in that moment of intimacy and an intimate, profound connection between the Jewish people and Hashem, it's no one else's business to be there, including the angels. And so this is represented by the fact that no one else, no other people, no other Kohanim even were allowed to be present when the Kohen was burning the incense. And even the angels departed. That is the service that was done on the Mizbeach Hazav. And so it makes sense that the discussion, the conversation about the Mizbeach Hazav, which is the epitome of what the Mishkan is about, is going to be a conversation on its own. It's not just thrown in together with the menorah and the shulchan. The menorah and the shulchan are invaluable, infinitely valuable, and the menorah also has a very important, powerful role, and we might have time to talk about that for a couple of minutes also. But the most important feature, the point ultimately of the Mishkan was V'shachanti b'seichem, that Hashem should be present among us. When every one of us makes our life into a temple, a sanctuary, we make our body and our home into a temple for Hashem, the point of that is that Hashem should be present, when present, generally when we talk about Hashem being present in the Mishkan, in the temple, we think of present in a very sort of tangible way, and the way that the word present was probably used mostly historically up until quite recently, I'm guessing. The word present now is used to mean not just present, right? When I was a kid, I think the teacher would call out attendance to call out your name and you say present. Right? What does present mean? Present means that your body is in the room sitting on a chair and the teacher could cross you off on the attendance list. Right? If you're having a conversation with someone and they say, you're not really present, are you? It's like, what do you mean I'm not present? Like, do you not see me? It's like, well, I see your body and I look at your eyes and I see that your mind is elsewhere, your heart is elsewhere. You're not present, right? Present doesn't necessarily just mean geographically this is where our body is located. That's part of it. But in referencing our mind, our consciousness, our thoughts, our heart, present, it ultimately means the same thing. Are our thoughts here or are our thoughts elsewhere? Is our heart here or is our heart elsewhere? V'shachanti b'seichem, a place that Hashem will dwell, that Hashem will be present. It's not just, you can't really separate them. It's easier to separate with a person, at least conceptually, because the body and the mind are separate phenomena. But the point of a Mishkan is that Hashem should be present, integrated into our lives, part of our lives. It's not like Hashem just, like we make our house into a Mishkan, and Hashem will come and sit on our couch and scroll on his phone with his feet up, but he's present. Whatever, apologies for whatever was wrong with what I just said. But yeah, that's another level, same thing, I guess. Right? That's not what it means. It means that Hashem is present in a profound and personal and intimate and connected way. That's the point. And so the Keteres, which is the epitome of this representation of oneness, of this deep, intimate connection, which is why no one else was allowed to be present when the Keteres was offered, including the angels, that oneness is what it's all about. It's all about the oneness between each of us in our own Mishkan is about the oneness between ourselves and Hashem. And, real intimacy, a real connection, when people share a real connection, generally, they don't feel a need to broadcast it to the world. The moment that a connection or a relationship needs to be broadcast to the world, that means this relationship isn't actually about the two people who are in the relationship, because if it was, they wouldn't need to broadcast it to anyone else. It means that there's something about this relationship that depends on other people's input or other people's approval or other people knowing about it, which means it's not really a relationship between these two people. It's some sort of complex thing that involves a whole lot of people. Right? A real connection that two people share is a connection between those two people. It doesn't involve anyone else. It doesn't need anyone's approval or anyone's input or participation, and it shouldn't have it. And, a proper, healthy relationship doesn't need to be broadcast or shared. And the same thing is here. And so the discussion about the Mizbeach is on its own. It's separate. It's its own conversation. And when that happened, no one else was present. Our relationship with Hashem is something that every one of us should have individually ourselves. And every one of us deserves to have it ourselves, and every one of us is entitled to have it ourselves. Every one of us has a spark of Hashem inside of us. That's who we are. And every one of us has the opportunity to make our body, our home, our life into a sanctuary for Hashem, in which Hashem is present all the way to the sort of the idea of the Keteres on the golden Mizbeach, Kesher, that oneness that we have with Hashem. Every one of us has the opportunity and the calling to have our own true, deep, profound connection and intimacy with Hashem. That's our own thing. And it belongs to us. No one else has any say in it. It doesn't mean we can't obviously get input and, seek guidance, etc. But it doesn't belong to anyone but ourselves. No one else has any input. No one else has any right to interfere or to have any say. Or it's our own personal relationship with Hashem. And it's a deep, profound, intimate connection. And that's what's represented by the Keteres. This is why it's on its own at the end, because this is the whole point. This is the punchline. Right? I feel for the thing that's resonating me with them at the moment more than like a blog post or whatever is like a good poem, right? A good poem, whether it's an old, sort of classic rhyming poem or a slam poem or something like that. When you have a poem and it's written beautifully, and then that last line is just a nuclear bomb and it just like, boom, and then the poem just stops. The impact that closing line has can be very, very powerful. Much more than if that most powerful line was buried in the middle of the poem and then you continued. It would get diluted somewhat by the things that come afterwards. You want to take that line that's fire and you want it to be powerful, And also, that's where you want to really try and take the whole message and put the whole message into one line and boom, and leave the person with that message in the most powerful, concise, impactful way, because that's what they're leaving with. And so the thing that all of this ends with, all of these things are amazing. All of these things are beautiful and invaluable. And any one of the things in the Mishkan, is literally of infinite holiness and divinity and value, etc. But what it all comes down to, what it's all about, if you want to pick the one thing in the Mishkan, that's not just an invaluable part of it, but this is that concluding sentence, that line at the end that's going to give you the whole message in one punch. That's the incense on the golden Mizbeach, that knot where we become tied into a knot together with Hashem, intertwined into one composite entity that is comprised of two things intertwined and tied together so that they become one composite entity. That oneness, and that oneness, that's not just we have a connection to Hashem, it's a deep, powerful, intimate oneness that every one of us is naturally designed to have, and every one of us is entitled to have and deserves to have. And it belongs to us, ourselves. No one else has anything to do with it. And going back to the opening, we had a question. Why is this separated? Why do we not talk about the Mizbeach together with the menorah and the Shulchan?
Because the menorah was made by Hashem.
But that's a whole separate thing that we were going to get to, and maybe we can do it super briefly. But the point of why it's so important to answer the question is because this is true in our own temple. V'shachanti b'soicham, in the individual temple that each one of us can and should and must make in our own body, our own home, our own life. And that is by putting the golden Mizbeach at the end, it's letting us know this is the punchline. This is what it's all about. This is what all the other things are contributing towards. All the other things that we do, all the other things we do in our lives are contributing towards, are there to contribute towards our oneness with Hashem, our connection with Hashem. And so the Mizbeach, the incense, that is all of that expressed explicitly, where we have the incense, the ketores, the kesher, that knot, that oneness, that profound intimacy with Hashem, that is at the end, because that's the punchline, that's what it's all about. And everything we do contributes towards that. Everything we do contributes towards the connection we have with Hashem. Everything we do is leading towards that and contributing towards that, and that's the point of it all. The point of it all is that every single one of us it deserves and can and should and is entitled to, and is also designed to. It's not like we have to create something new. This is what we're designed for. We have that spark of Hashem inside of us. It's just a matter of living true to that, doing the work, and yes, it's a real job, so that we should have this not just deep down, but as part of our conscious experience, but we should experience a real human sense of connection with Hashem, of intimacy with Hashem. That's what it's all about. And that's our own thing. Every single one of us has our own instance of that. And it's ours and ours alone. No one else has any say. No one else can participate. No one else can contribute. And certainly no one else can take it away. Let's talk about the menorah for a couple of minutes. We're supposed to finish at 35 officially. To give everyone a chance to actually breathe in between this class and the next one. We'll talk about the menorah maybe very briefly. So the menorah, it says that Moshe, long story short, Moshe, the Midrashim talk about it, Moshe was confused about how to make the menorah, so he took this piece of gold. Hashem said, just take the lump of gold, throw it into the fire, and then the menorah just emerged from the fire out of the gold that Moshe Rabbeinu threw in. the obvious, question is what was so difficult? Was the menorah? Like constructing the menorah would have been pretty complicated, but like, was it that much more complicated than making the shulchan or the mizbeach or any of the other things or the kruvim? That like all of those things were good, and when it came to this, Moshe was just like, I'm lost. I'm like, I don't know. I'm dumbfounded. I have no idea. Like, sorry, I'm completely stuck. And Hashem didn't even bother giving an instruction. It was just like, just throw it into the fire. I'll take care of it. It's like one of those things. Someone asks you for instructions, and you're like, when it comes to this, it'd be faster if I just do it myself than try to explain it to you. Kind of like that. What's so complicated about the menorah? Well, obviously, there's something else going on here. And the thing that's going on is, what was the menorah? The menorah was, very interestingly, and I was talking about this recently actually, and a student told me they saw this in real life, a real life example of this. If you have a look at the window, this is actually a pretty deep window, right? What's the depth of the window? 10 inches, let's say. A lot of windows these days are much narrower. In a structure like the Beis HaMikdash, an old building, a Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan, whatever, old structures that were tall and big, and they didn't have the technology we have now with the kind of bricks and the mortar and all that. Yeah, walls of tall structures were thick. And, a window was deep. A window, you could think of a window opening as relatively two-dimensional. They were very three-dimensional. And generally speaking, the well-built windows, the windows of well-constructed buildings, they were not symmetrical in terms of the depth. The opening on the inside wasn't the same size as the opening on the outside. And you actually still see this, I think, in skylights a lot. When you have a skylight, right, there's an opening in the actual roof, and then there's an opening in the ceiling. Very often the opening in the ceiling, the window in the ceiling is larger than the window in the roof. Why? Because the point of the sunlight is to allow sunlight in. So by making the window in the ceiling larger than the window in the roof, you allow the light to spread, so you get more light coming in and spreading out to brighten up the interior more effectively. And that's the way that windows generally were or often were constructed, was that the inner opening of the window was larger than the outer opening, because the point of the window was to allow light in. So by having the three-dimensional structure of the window broadening towards the inside, that would allow the light to come in and to spread and to illuminate the inside more effectively. The Beis HaMikdash, it was the reverse. The windows, the inside was smaller and the outside was larger. And this is for the same reason that windows like this, and I just learned this last week from a student who told me they actually saw this in real life, lighthouse windows are built the same way, right? What's the point of a lighthouse? And the analogy here is so beautiful. The point of a lighthouse is, right, once upon a time, there was no GPS and there was no night vision. If you were in a ship and you were sailing and you didn't know where you were, and there was an island in the way and it had no lights, you went right into the island and you got a hole in the bottom of your ship, and that was that. Bye-bye, everybody. Right? So islands would have a lighthouse, which was this tall structure generally, and at the top there was an opening and they would have some sort of big fire inside, and then they had windows that would allow the light to spread so that people could see. If you're driving a ship at night and you see some light, that's not a star. You know there's something there, and you steer clear. And this student told me they actually were recently at a lighthouse and saw that the windows in the lighthouse were the same way, three-dimensional through this thick wall. The windows broadened as they went outwards, because the point of the lighthouse is not to the point of the windows is not to allow sunlight in, it's to allow the light that's inside the lighthouse to spread out as much as possible, so to allow maximum visibility, so people who are, in ships and boats will see it and will know to steer clear. So because the point of these windows is not to allow light in, it's to allow light out, so the structure of the windows is that they broaden as they go outwards to allow the maximum spreading of light outwards. And this is the exact same thing as the Beis HaMikdash. The function of the Beis HaMikdash was a place in which the divinity of the Creator was maximally present. But the point of the Beis HaMikdash wasn't just for it to be in the Beis HaMikdash. It was that from there it could spread out into the world. It was a nexus, like a conduit that allowed divinity into the world, and it was a source for the whole world. So the windows opened and spread outwards to allow divinity, to allow light to spread out into the world. And this was done, one of the things, the vessel, the utensil, the keli, that was the sort of the epitome of this idea of light was the menorah. The menorah was a candelabrum. It was used to generate physical light, visible light. And Moshe's question is, hang on a second. What was the menorah made out of? Menorah was made out of gold. If you ask some random person on the street, what do they think of when they think of gold? Well, some people might say, investment portfolio, and other people are going to say, jewelry. Right? Gold, the primary function of gold is vanity. It's the epitome of materialism. It's the most materialistic material that there is. And so Moshe Rabbeinu says, you're talking to me about integrating divinity, light, illuminating the world with divinity. How is the thing that you're using to bring that light into the world made out of gold, out of the most materialistic material that there is? And so Hashem's response wasn't, oh, here's my explanation, let me tell you how. Hashem's response was, right, what happens when someone's like, just give it to me? What they're saying is, you know what, you're right. This is too much for you. Just give it to me, I'll take care of it. And that was Hashem's response here. Hashem's response was, you know what, you're right. You can't. I can. So you throw it in the fire, I will make the menorah. But that doesn't help us in terms of the message for us. If we are supposed to be bringing light and divinity into the world and into the most materialistic parts of the world, into gold, the fact that Hashem can do it, what does that have to do with us? What does that help us? And the answer is that Hashem is in every one of us. Going back to what we just talked about, the reason that every one of us can have this profound, intimate connection with Hashem is because we're designed for it. We already have Hashem inside of us. It's just a matter of working to activate it, etc. Thank you. And so the message here with the menorah is the same thing. Hashem's telling Moshe Rabbeinu, if you were doing this on your own merits, you wouldn't be able to. I can. Throw it in the fire. I'll show you that I can do it, even though you can't. Now remember that you have me inside of you. And when you do what you're supposed to do and you live true to the part of me that's inside of you, there's nothing stopping you from doing it too. Thank you. Be'ezus Hashem.